I just want to kick us off. Like, I want to welcome everyone. It's the second in our series for MVP, and we're really focusing the series on emotional health, leading up to the Mental Health Awareness Month in May. And really, you know, this is an opportunity for us to bring in people within our networks, which we're so excited for Suzi and Steve to join us today. That can really bring some insight both into folks in our audience larger, but then also in our audience, like just our MVP members. And really, you know, based off of what we had conversations with, you know, last week in the panel, really framed a lot of theories that we had in emotional health, right? And so there's some great things that have been happening in the last 6 or 7 years around like the brain and brain science, is really exciting. And Steve and Suzi may talk a little bit about that today. And I kind of want to just pull back the curtain again and sort of remind folks sort of where we're at, right? Which is this, you know, conversation we have that 1 in 5 Americans experience like mental health challenges, and this is prior to COVID-19. Many of them have been thrown into social isolation. All of us have because of COVID-19. And what we've noticed, and this is the general population, right? This is outside the MVP, our combat veterans and former athletes population, that they just did a poll last week, where 55% of Americans that they interviewed had a severe increase in their mental health challenges because of COVID-19. So we're seeing this across the nation. We know that people are experiencing this in very different ways. And so really, you know, our conversation today is how do we wrap this into some practices? We talked a little bit about theory, talk a little bit more about theory today, but how can we talk about this in practice? And one thing we wanted to bring in this week that's different from last week is we had the opportunity to do a survey with some of our members in our program about, you know, what are some of their own wellness practices? What are some things that they want to ask in conversation? And so what's going to be different about this panel is we'll do a little bit of conversation at the beginning, probably about for 30 minutes, 25 minutes. Steve and Suzi will kind of go over their things. And then we want it to be a dialogue. So we'll spotlight you. If you want to do your questions on the right-hand side, please, you know, add questions in the chat, or you can tweet us as well. And that'll be an opportunity for us. We'll have AJ, our marketing manager, surveying Twitter. If you do have tweets with questions or things that you want to comment about, we'll bring up towards the very end. So opportunity on the right-hand side to put that in the chat for your questions for Suzi and Steve. And we'll get to all those questions towards the end after they chat about a little bit about their work. And then, you know, most importantly, in the chat box on the right, when you're asking questions and this little about process, just make sure that if you want to be on video, you know, put in parentheses like video question. If you want to remain anonymous, like put in parentheses like anonymous or like non-video question. And you can send those questions directly to me. So when you do on the right-hand side, there's a chat, and you'll see everyone, and you just do a drop down and find me, Jacob Toups, in the private section, and you can send it directly to me, and then I'll field all the questions. So kind of 2 ways to participate after we do these conversations. One is through the chat box on the right-hand side. You know, you want to put video question, non-video question, send it directly to me privately. The second way is through Twitter, and we can pull Twitter questions anonymously through that as well. And you can tweet us at Vets and Players on Twitter. And so a little bit of just some framing around today's process and how we're going to do that. And also, like, if you want to donate or you want to donate to MVP or learn more about our organization, we have a lovely new like texting platform, which is Vets and Players. You want to text Vets and Players to 31996. And so we'll have that a little bit later in our conversation. So we're going to kick off now. And before we get going, I want to get a sense of a little bit who we have. So I'm going to introduce myself a little bit. We'll go into Suzi and Steve, and they'll do some introductions, and then we'll kick off everything. So a little bit about me. From last time, I'm the Executive Director of Emerging Vets and Players. I've had the opportunity to serve the folks in our program, combat veterans and former professional athletes, for the last 4 years, or sorry, 3 years. And I came into the scene because I really am passionate about the mental health aspect and how people can heal from that. And so particularly our organization, Emerging Vets and Players, is started by Jay Glazier and Nate Boyer, both our founders. And Jay had seen that former professional athletes struggled in transition, and Nate the same way with veterans. And so they came together in 2015 to launch MVP. And it's a peer support group for folks who want to get some support from their peers in the mental health side, resources, all kinds of things. We meet every single week. And with our recent pivot for COVID-19, we're now virtual and more accessible than ever. So if you want to learn more, you can go to our website at vetsandplayers.org. So now I'm going to kick us off. It's a little bit about me and what we do at Merging Vets and Players. And now I'd love to intro Steve. And so Steve, tell us a little bit about yourself. And then after Steve, we'll go a little bit to Suzi.
Sure, thank you. I'm very honored and very humbled to be a part of this group. Just wanted to say that up front. I think most importantly, I'm a dad. Dad to 3 kids, I'm a grandpa. Yeah, you probably say you look like a grandpa, and I am. I have 9 grandchildren. I'm a retired teacher, a retired coach, and I'm now working with my boss, but really my old friend, known him since middle school, and his name is Dr. Bruce Perry. And he started an organization called the Neurosequential Network, which I'll talk more about that big word in a second. But I'm helping him with the education mission. So I teach teachers and educators and kids and parents. That's me.
Great, thanks, Steve. And now I'll pass to Suzi.
Oh my gosh, you're gonna have the grandparent day, apparently. That's what's happening here. Because I'm a grandmother, Jima. And if you were on the huddle last night, some of you might have been, you got to meet my grandson, who's 15 and a half years old, and a 2-time leukemia survivor, thriver. We always talk about thriving. And how I got to MVP was actually through Unbreakable and through my daughter, Kirsha, who runs Big Heart Ranch for me. And it's just been such a joy to watch it come from just a moment, a thought, and a mission and a desire from both Jay and Nate. They came out to Boulder Crest. For 4.5 years. I lived out in Virginia most recently to help create a curriculum for combat veterans. And it's based on post-traumatic growth, a 35-year science that I'll talk about more in a minute. And it was just an honor to be involved with such a mission. And I really see that as a mission. I actually started working with veterans, though, with the Wounded Warrior Project over 12 years ago when they came to my ranch. I have a ranch in Malibu, which you're all hopefully going to be able to come if you're in the LA area. And it was just an honor for me to meet a group of men and women who want to know. I say there's 2 kinds of people in the world, people who want to know and people who don't want to know. And you are competent and courageous and compassionate and smart. And I just said, I want to hang out with these people. So for my own well-being, I chose to hang out with you guys and learn and be able to better myself through partnering with and walking what I like to call the parallel path or the parallel practice. And today I'm just going to share with you some of the things that I had to learn to do to create the person I deserve to be, that my family deserves to have around, and the life I deserve to live. And these practices are so important to me, and I'd love to share them with you. And some of them I actually got from you guys as well. So that's me. And don't hold it against me that I'm a licensed therapist. I oftentimes say that when I introduce myself, I do a lot of speaking and I go, yes, I'm a licensed therapist, and I work with, some people with some of the most severe bipolar, anxiety, depression, addiction, and that's just my coworkers. So know that not everybody who has those letters at the end of their name should be helping anybody at this point. They should be helping themselves. So that's me.
Thanks so much, Suzi. Appreciate it. So, to kick off this panel, we're going to go straight into Steve and the work that Steve has done. And so I'm really excited to bring Steve's work in for the people who have been a part of Merging Vets and Players, and why I kind of want to give some context to Suzi and Steve's work. We've sort of, the best ideas are stolen ideas. We've kind of stolen a lot of their ideas, and you'll see as Steve and Suzi talk about their work, maybe there's some things at MVP that we stole from them that we're doing in our own work. And that's primarily because the work that Steve and Suzi have been doing over the last 10 to 15 years really does work. I do it, I practice it, which we'll talk a little bit more about the practices. But I first want to kick it off with Steve. And I brought Steve in because MVP had the opportunity a couple months back to feature some of our work in the Neurosequential Network, which he'll talk about. And they have a sports feature, and how are we using physical activity and sports to help the brain heal. And so, lately the Neurosequential Network and Dr. Bruce Perry, who's Steve's colleague, was featured in articles and TED Talks, and most recently last week featured on Oprah's Apple Plus show. So I'm going to kick it to Steve, and Steve, can you give us an overview of the network and its work?
Yeah, can I share my screen now?
You can.
Thank you. How are we doing?
Perfect.
Okay, let me first of all just talk about our network. First thing, I guess my part of the network, and Jacob already said, we now have a sports mission, we have an education mission, we have a mission for therapists and early childhood providers. So there's a number of missions of the neurosequential network, but one thing that we all do in common is we teach teachers and students and parents and therapists about, you know, how the brain develops and organizes from the womb to the present day. And that turns out to be a foundational, fundamental core concept that we have to always share. So I have that kind of picture of that up here right now, and I'm just going to talk about it in a second. But what we often, I love to share is I think the brain is the most marvelous creation, and it's uniquely designed to help us. And I always put my arms out. It helps us on one end to survive, just survive if we need it. But on the other side, the brain is created to help us thrive and to live well and to live beautiful lives. So, but don't we all know that we're on this continuum somewhere all the time? And sometimes we're just surviving, and sometimes we're thriving, and we're everywhere in between. In fact, I think I'd rather make a circle and say, we're all in this somewhere. It's a universal thing. Because the second thing we teach about besides the brain organization is how the brain responds to stress. And stress, again, it's universal. It's needed for life and growth. It's a part of all of our lives. And, you know, we say stress isn't the bad person. Stress is only bad when we can't manage it. And so we often teach about managing it. And that's where this slide, I think, comes into play for me. As a teacher, I'll just use my cursor to say, I thought the brain was just one big cortex, to tell you the truth, and that my job was to change it. Well, that was all partly true, but because this cortex is the part of our brain, which I once thought was the whole brain, that is the center of thinking. These foundational, you know, constructs that we all have, our ability to think abstractly, to think concretely, to have a sense of reward. What I didn't understand was we have other systems in our brain that are not the cortex. And we have this limbic system, which, as you can see, is more about behavior and emotions. And really, I would center it on relationships. It's the center, it's a part of our brain that really helps us develop and maintain strong relationships. And as we go lower in the brain, we get to more primitive but very important aspects of our life, our motor regulation, our ability to balance and be in rhythm and to have coordination. That's a part of this level of the brain. And eventually we get to the bottom of the brain, which is crucial to all of our lives. This is the brain stem, where all of information coming from the outside world through our senses, or information coming from our inside world in our body, come up to the brain to be processed and thought about and reacted to. And so what essentially we teach in our network is, in order for kids to behave better and learn better and just do better, we have to have this cortex open for business. That's what we say. Is the cortex open for business? And we realize it's only open for business when these bottom areas of the brain are doing well. And when they're regulated, in other words, not too much stress coming in at one time and managed, when stress is managed and regulated low in the brain, we can connect, we can concentrate, we can create, and we can have healthier brains all the way around. And what I didn't know as a teacher was how important these lower systems were to making the upper system better. And that is a foundational piece of our work. So we say this part of the brain helps us calm down, this part of the brain helps us connect, and this part of the brain helps us concentrate and create, and we all love a beautiful flow. That's essentially foundational work of our organization.
Great. I love that, Steve. And I think, like, you know, what we talk about a little bit in VP and some of the work that we've stolen from you all, merging it with Suzi's, is like, you know, the concept of the brain, right? The brain is like a fist if you picture it, and it develops from the back to the front, and the front is like what you're talking about, the prefrontal cortex, like where people thinking, the thinking brain is here. And you know what Tony talked about last week, the guy that we had brought on, was what happens when you get trapped in sort of the back end, which is like a lot of the things you talked about the bottom pyramid, and how we're not actually thinking, we're not in our thinking brain, right? We're not thinking about what's sort of going on, and how that helps sort of like disrupt what's going on in our lives and how stress impacts that. So I love this work, and I love what you guys are doing. And so the next I really want to move into, Steve, is that you guys have obviously impacted our work in the field of mental health in America. And I know that you have a personal story that you'd like to share about how it relates to your own life. And, you know, we really believe at MVP that we want to practice what we preach, right? And so specifically, this story relates to a time in which you're a coach. And so can you share a little bit about that story with us?
Right, I will. And I'll put this slide up first, you know, because now you see that same picture of a upside down triangle understanding of the brain. And because I needed to think this through when I was coaching, our first job working with kids and coaching is to regulate them, to help them feel calm and safe. And we often do that through relationships and through exercise and through all the things we do. And then eventually we get to that high level of the brain where they can reason and have really great amount of self-control, which we'd love for all of our athletes. So I wanted to share a story about a sprinter I had named Dante. Actually, he's a California kid. So I'm going to give California a little credit. I lived in Minot, North Dakota, which is an air-based town. A lot of veterans in our town, and a lot of got to teach a lot of kids of military members of the military. And Dante was one of those, and I was coaching him. And I want to tell you, Dante was a sprinter, 100-meter, 200-meter sprinter, very smooth, very fluid, just a beautiful runner, but he wasn't super strong. And I said to him, and honestly, in the sense of regulation, I talked to Dante in a very, not at the track, away from the track, in a really friendly conversation. I said, Dante, do you want to be just good, or would you like to be great? Because I think you can be really good at the 100 and the 200, but I think you could be special. I think you can be great in the 400. And he looked at me like, Coach, he said, is that all the way around the track? And I said, yeah, that's all the way around the track, Dante. You know, I don't get to hand off a baton. No, you don't get to hand off a baton, Dante. It's all the way around the track. And he pretty much said to me, I don't think I could do that, Coach. I mean, that's too far. That's too hard. And as I thought about Dante's reaction, I thought about how I feel right now with COVID-19. And they say, well, you're going to stay in place till June. And then it changes to July. And then maybe now it's changed to January. And some people say 2022. And I say, that's too long. That's too far, Coach Fauci. I can't go that far. I can't make it that long. And then I have to think of this. I think of this saying, which I thought of with my friend Dante, and I think of with myself in this situation, that I can't think my way to the end. I can't think myself into a new way of living, but we can live ourselves into a new way of thinking. So I said, here's what we're going to do, Dante. I know you can't think about running a 400, but I bet you can run 50 meters in 7 seconds. He goes, yeah, I can run 50 meters in 7 seconds backwards. I said, well, great. Then I can think you can be a champion. And he looked at me funny, like, what, you know, I don't get what you mean. And I said, okay, here's your workout. I want you to run 50 meters in 7 seconds, no faster, no slower. And he did. And then he said, what do I do next, Coach? I said, rest. You want, like, rest? I don't need to rest. Tell me what the next thing to do. I said, no, you need to rest. I said, now, after you rest, I want you to run 100 meters in 14 seconds, but I'm going to yell out your time every 50 meters. So all you have to think about is 50 meters at a time. And I know you're all way ahead of me. You see what's coming, right? Because then it was a 150, and then it was a 200, and then it was a 250, and then it was a 342 seconds. And then eventually I was going to ask him, at the end of the workout, and those of you who are athletes know how hard this would be. At the end of that workout, I say, I want you to run a full 400 in 56 seconds in your tennis shoes. Tired. Now, you know what Dante quit asking me about partway through that workout? He quit saying he didn't need to rest. He finally understood, yes, I need to rest. But what was I doing in building Dante through this workout was saying, all you have to do to succeed is think 50 meters at a time. Just 50 meters at a time. And I will give you a reward every 50 meters. And we turned him loose. As a junior, he did become a state champion. As a senior, we wanted him to become the first North Dakota boy ever to run 47 something in the 400. And he trained the same way. He did this workout several times a year. But what was he always thinking? 50 meters at a time. Instead of thinking himself all the way to the end, like we're all tempted to do, we decided we will dose your level of stress so that you only have to think a little at a time. This picture might show it better. Is I'll give you a little dose of stress, and then you'll react to that stress and you'll rest. I'll give you another bigger dose of stress, you'll react to that stress, and then you'll rest. And you see how that goes on until we get to a high level dose of stress, but he keeps returning to a really good place. And Dante gets it. In fact, he gets it so well that when he's a senior in high school, he runs 47.8 in the 400 at the state meet, the first North Dakota boy ever to do it. Why did he do it? Because he could live it out 50 meters at a time. And I just want to emphasize how important that statement is. And I think, in fact, you know what, at the state meet, I timed Dante, and his first 200 was exactly the same speed as his second 200. Exactly, 23.9, 23.9. Why? Because all he was thinking was 50 meters at a time. So he had this beautiful flow and a sense of equilibrium, and well, he did something special. But he couldn't have done it without, then he, going back, he really couldn't have done it without living himself into that reality rather than thinking himself. And as the last thing I just want to share, and it kind of in the spirit of being vulnerable, I'm going through a very tough time in life. A lot of family grief that preceded COVID. It is hard. I feel like I'm in a tunnel a lot. I feel like I'm in the darkest part of that tunnel sometimes. But what I keep telling myself is, Steve, 50 meters at a time. Today, I can do today. And if I can't do today, I can do an hour. If I can't do an hour, I can do a breath. And I think Suzi could teach us a lot about that, about the importance of a breath. But I can make it. And so, that's the end of my story. But I hope the idea is, if we dose this life in a way that we can manage little bites, yeah, we can win. And I maybe have a chance to answer questions about that later. But that's my story about Dante, and it's working for me.
Steve, I love that, and to echo your spirit of vulnerability, and especially dosing. For the folks that live in Los Angeles, it's been hard as a policymakers in COVID-19. Of just like, feels like every 4 or 5 days some new restriction comes down. So every time a new restriction comes down, you have to wait in line outside the grocery store. Oh, now you have to wear a mask, right? Yet, like, I'm thinking about sort of how our policymakers are dosing some of this stuff to make sure we don't go like this, right? And I remember what happened this past week when he had, Mayor Eric Garcetti had pushed through masks at grocery stores, and my stress response, Steve, was like, oh my God, right? And then I went to the store, and everyone is has masks on, and I'm having this out of body experience where I'm just like, I need to get in, I need to get my groceries, just a few things, and I need to get out, because right now I don't feel safe. I feel so stressed. And so instead of probably pausing, taking a deep breath, and then maybe waiting even a day to go to the store if I really could, I ran straight into the situation, because I was like, oh no, I need to go now before it gets worse. And the reality is nothing's going to change. from like Monday to Friday, right? The policy just got implemented on Monday, but how our stress response goes up, and we're thinking about, you know, here comes a new policy. There's going to be panic buying, so people are going to go straight to whatever and go into panic mode. You're seeing less and less in that as more things are coming down. So, you know, taking this concept of like how we feel that like when these new things kind of come down the pipe, that we hope that like our policymakers and people in our lives are thinking about the dosing method, right? And how do we slowly kind of ease that out? So thanks, Stephen. We'll get more to that. So Suzi, I want to introduce you. And so obviously, you know, you've done a lot of extensive work in the last 15 plus years on like the brain and the brain healing and post-traumatic growth. And we're so lucky that we're able to borrow some of your talents for the things that we do at MVP. And so can you share a little bit about the work that you've done?
Yeah, and I just want to thank Steve, because what's so wonderful is he's given us pictures, and a lot of us learn through pictures, not just speaking, about what it looks like to actually help your brain and not see it as something that you were born with, and this is just the way I am, and it doesn't change, and now it's broken, and now it's damaged, and all of that. And the other thing, that upside down triangle, what's so important about that is we're all about foundation. Every single one of you, as an athlete or a veteran, understands foundational training. You went to a boot camp, you went to practice, you went to all kinds of athletic practice, and you understand that you're only as strong as your weakest muscle. And therefore you had to make your whole body strong. You had to understand how to learn new things. And they dosed that at boot camp, and they dosed that at your training. So you are very adept at training and practice. And they also did it physically, that they didn't sit you down and tell you how to play football. They did a little bit of that. You went out and played football. They didn't tell you how to shoot a gun by giving you just a PowerPoint and then giving that. You put it in your hands, you practiced, you trained. And you were also capable of retraining. I want to remember this, because what Steve's talking about is nothing in our brain is static and nothing is forever at all. And most thoughts and feelings that we have were either given to us or done to us. So where your brain is today is the operating system that was given to you many, many, many years ago. The great news is, at one time we thought we could drill a hole in your head and let the demons out. So great, that's what we thought we could do, and that would help. We're not doing that anymore, thank God. And so we've learned a lot about the brain, and we still only know 10% about it at this time. But what we have learned is this idea of neuroplasticity, the idea that that brain wants to change. That body wants to heal, the brain wants to heal, it wants to change. And we know that it can. And we even know that even though there are sections of the brain, like Steve showed us, they work in concert. If you look at that diagram again, what I loved about it, I'm a blue collar girl, Steve, that's plumbing. Did you see the plumbing and the wiring go through the brain? It was awesome. All I saw was plumbing. It was all connected. And at the bottom is where you were talking about regulation. You guys know that if you don't regulate energy or water or electricity, if too much comes in, it does not work, right? It can blow the system. You also know that you can't do anything if you don't have water coming up from the source. So I just have plumbing in my house that we were just working with. So I'm really understanding this idea of I can't just take it right from the street and just bring it right in my house. I've got to put a regulator on it. So the first thing I had to do was to regulate what's coming in before I ever have a great thought. Those thoughts up there are not going to work if I don't do the basic foundational work. And every single one of you know that about the equipment that you used, either in your athletic training or your athletic playing or being a combat veteran. You knew that you had to understand what you were putting in that equipment and how it was running. And that was your basic thing. And every day you had to check that. How is it that the military has never ever said to you that you are the most important equipment that we've ever had and that we ever will have? And to help you regulate and to understand how feeding yourself, breathing, water, all of those regulation practice, all of that is absolutely imperative to your brain working well. And I joked with someone today who was struggling. Her daughter's taking some drugs, and she's talking so fast that she's like getting panicked as she's talking. And I stopped her and asked her to breathe. I said, you know what? You're on the worst drug right now. And she got horrified. She said, what are you talking about? I'm not on drugs. I go, yeah, you are. You're on the strongest, most hurtful drug that we've ever had on this planet. And she was horrified. And I said, it's called adrenaline. It can be helpful in small doses for short periods of time, but when you live on that drug, you are on, it's like your daughter's doing better than you are right now because she's only on ketamine. You're on adrenaline, and it's absolutely going to affect. And the brain cannot function on that on long periods of time. Not only that, it breaks the body down. So this idea that we get to go into our thinking through our body is absolutely imperative. For all you athletes, most of you, if you came from any kind of stress-filled childhood, that running and that athletic ability forced oxygen into your body. In fact, even now, one of the reasons why MVP works so well is because we start out with oxygen. That's exactly why that workout is so important. We also now know, and Steve will back me up, that every time we try to fix the brain from the top down, it doesn't work. And now we know that exercise in and of itself is the greatest healer of the brain than anything else we've got. And Steve's got that great quote about living, which I've stolen, because we used to say you can't think your way into right action. You can only act your way into right thinking. And what does that mean? That means when I move my body, when I breathe deeply, when I get enough oxygen, when I slow myself down, is when my brain makes connection. We talk about synapses and wiring. And the only way the brain can wire is two things it needs. It needs a slow process in order to learn and to make that connection. It needs some repetition. It obviously needs the oxygen. And we need to understand that if we continue to train and practice on a regular basis, the brain will support that. So post-traumatic growth, let's just talk about that for a second. So the first thing we do, and the first thing we put in our curriculum at Boulder Crest, was the first day was all about regulation. It was only about breathing. We taught Andrew Vile's wonderful breathing. I would love all you guys and women to look this up. It's called 4-7-8. We got so excited about this idea of breathing and bringing in oxygen that when someone was getting a little anxious, we would look over to them and just go 4-7-8. Or we'd stop in the middle of a curriculum thing and just say, come on, everybody, let's do some 4-7-8s. So that idea that deep breathing, consistent deep breathing, will actually help you retain and move up to connection. So that was absolutely imperative of us to do regulation before we could ever bring in the concept of post-traumatic growth. I want to say one other thing. I think all of us probably in this Zoom right now have tried to have an argument with someone or have had an argument with someone, right? So let's go to reason. So you did reason, reconnection, right? And then regulate. Was it reconnection or relate? Relate. All right. So if you try to do it in the opposite, here's what it looks like. I'm going to reason with someone who's on adrenaline right now, who's absolutely dysregulated, hasn't eaten, has no water in them, you know, filled with adrenaline from the fear of what might happen, the anxiety, but yet I'm going to try to reason with that person. I can't remember how many times I tried to do that before I went back and regulated myself, reconnected with that person by listening and listening deeply, and then maybe participate in reasoning. So that's why what Steve is talking about is so important and why it supports, the science supports the practice. And if we do these practices, which we'll talk about in a minute, it's important. Last bit, post-traumatic growth. I have absolutely been affected by the trauma of my childhood. There is absolutely no question about that. My anxiety, my depression, even my high blood pressure, believe it or not, All of that comes from the years of tremendous childhood abuse. Okay, got it. Now, when I found these practices, I was able to look at something else from my childhood. I also got some of the greatest strengths of my life from that trauma. There's no question in my mind that I am in this Zoom right now because I got some of the most amazing strengths and courage from those traumas. Would I want to go through them again? No. Can I ever say to you that there's one side of this story? No, there's not one side of the brain anymore. We know that. They work in concert. When one part gets hurt, the rest of the brain will jump in if you give it some practice and will try to relearn that which you can't do as easily anymore. And it's the same with trauma. To tell the story of trauma is to make sure we absolutely understand that we have gained gifts from that trauma as well. Jacob, is there anything else you want me to say in this little part, or can we move on?
No.
I'm all about doing.
Me too. Me too. I love this. I love it. And you know, it's so great that you bring a lot of these practices in. It's funny. And before we jump into questions from folks, which we really want to go into some of these practices, the one thing I just want to say is, ironically enough, Steve and Suzi are talking about, you know, the basic functions of the body, right? Being hungry. And one part of our culture that we laugh about is we're like, oh no, is this person hangry? Right? Are they hangry? But you know what? It's a real thing. And it's funny because we ask that jokingly when a lot of these people, you know, will go back and be like, you know what? I haven't eaten in 5 hours. Maybe that's why. And so it's become this comical part of our culture where it's like, oh, the person is hangry. But there's actual like science and regulations, some really interesting things that sort of back those things. So we're already practicing it. We're already aware of it, but now there's like this deeper level of understanding.
Yeah.
So
you know,
with that,
say one quick thing about eating.
Yeah, go ahead, Suzi.
So at Boulder Crest, first we taught the breathing, and then we brought up all these kinds of waters for them to drink. And we gave them, the first night we gave them their water bottle, and we absolutely monitored how much water they were drinking. And the third thing we did was we had food out 24/7. We had healthy snacks, and during any session, you could get up and go get food. And we actually got the men and women to eat something well every 2 hours. The change in people in 24 hours, just those 3 things were absolutely amazing.
I love it. I love it. In practice, Suzi, thanks so much. So I want to jump into a little bit about the survey from the members that we've taken for this past couple of weeks. So in order to inform like the next part of our section, we took a survey this past week with MVP members, just, you know, basically surveying some of their wellness practices. 64% mentioned that they want to be held accountable for their wellness practices. 38% said they wanted more individual support. And then 52% said they wanted more goal creation and specific steps for wellness practices. And then when we had asked what mental, emotional, financial practices do you need to support your growth and change, a few responses included to overcoming my limiting beliefs. One was supporting themselves through isolation, especially COVID-19, which we know a lot of our folks are at high risk of. Keeping a journal and writing down all the goals they've accomplished. That's a practice they're working on. Being connected to your peers. And then finally, being able to adapt to the pandemic and COVID-19. And so knowing all this, you know, we sent this over to the panelists to help us guide into some further questions from you all. So now we're going to open it up to questions. And so please feel free. You can send it on the right-hand side on the chat, just privately to me. On the second, if you want to, you can, and I know that David sent one perfectly like that, which is fantastic. And I can read out David's as well. Although I might spotlight David to just come in through video and actually ask your question, because we do want some dialogue that happens. And so with that, again, you can send it directly on the chat privately to me. You can tweet us at Bets and Players, and we'll kick off our questions now. And so, David, I'd like to go to you with your question. And so you have like a video response, but can you ask your question to Suzi and Steve, and I'll let you kick it off, David. Thanks so much. You have to go out. Yep, unmute.
There you go.
Oh,
can't hear you.
Can't hear you, David. Well, let's do.
There
you go. Good. Go for it, David.
There you go. Morning, guys. Thanks for taking my question. And it's regarding the outdoors and nature. I know you guys brought it up. I mean, for me, it's common sense, right? Being in the outdoors and just for me, specifically hiking, it's been huge thing in my life. So, I mean, just a quick question. Why has it taken, I guess, the doctors and physicians so long to push nature? I mean, I'm just starting to see papers and research studies, and I mean, coming out explaining how nature works, and being in the outdoors helps with mental health. I mean, it's common sense to me. Why has it taken so long for therapists or whatever, whoever's in charge? Why has it taken so long for that to push it onto us? I mean, for me, I was blessed to have a therapist that pushed that onto me, and it was her idea for me to start hiking and just being out there and getting back to nature again. And again, I was blessed with her having that, I guess, sense of awareness, and to push that on me. But again, I wish that was more common, if that makes sense.
David, I want to here for just a second, then I'm going to ask Steve to share with this. So I have a love-hate relationship with the medical model, and I know hate's pretty strong, but this idea that the expert gets to tell you what to do, but they don't have to do it, just bothers me. The other thing is, remember, this is a business. The medical model is a business, and everything needs to be done within the confines of how do I get so many people, how can I help so many people in a short period of time? That's called an office. So then there are all these restrictions and regulations and ethics and all of that to try to make sure that people who are helping other people are doing it ethically and well. Okay, I appreciate all that. And this idea that you've come up with, this idea of going outside, I just want to share that EMDR was discovered by a therapist who went on a walk. She went outside, she walked, she looked back and forth, but she was walking and she felt better and she was able to process some of the thoughts and feelings she was having. But she can't do that with every client. So there's the HIPAA thing and there's this. So what did she do? She found a way to bring it into the office. Personally, go for the walk. That, for me. Now, one other thing, this idea of being connected. So taking Steve's support, being outside, a lot of sports are done outside, not all of them, got it? So this idea of being outside and being connected, there is truly research that just putting your bare feet on the ground actually helps regulate you. That there is an energy source that comes through this earth that we know is there, and that it literally can regulate you. I hang out with horses. They have 30 feet of energy coming off their heart. 30 feet, that's how strong it is. If you stand next to a horse, we only have 7 feet coming off of ours. It literally lowers your blood pressure, as long as the horse is calm and not doing anything that's scaring you, but literally. So Steve, I want you to talk about this as well and share your experience with why the medical model doesn't always help us the most.
Okay.
Good, Steve.
I kind of like saying that the best criticism of the bad is the practice of the better. I think that's what Suzi was talking about. And David, I think that's what you're talking about. And I want to say amen to David. I don't even need to add to it. The value of nature right now and any little dose of it that we get is, I think nature is more regulating than anything I experience in this whole debacle that we're a part of. And my little 5-pound dog gets me out on at least 4 walks a day. And because I need it. I can work a little and then I need to go. And then I can work a little. Again, that's my dosing. That's my 50 meters. But my little dog is my rest. And she's and nature, I've gotten more used to bird calls and I'm recognizing birds. And I'm focused on that healing aspect of nature, which I think is great. I think the medical model is starting to get it, David. I think they are starting to get it. And I know that from my boss, Dr. Perry, who talks to lots of doctors in many places. And so I think it's changing. But it's probably slow to change. And I agree with Suzi. The medical model as an economic model doesn't like to necessarily teach us things that are free. But it doesn't cost us much to go for that walk, does it? And so I don't want to be a critic, but I want to just say amen to David, because you're on it. And I think the more we connect with nature, the better we're going to be in this during these months coming.
Thanks so much, Steve. I appreciate it. And thanks, David, for sharing your question. So the next question is from Chaplain Curtis Drafton. So I'm going to go to him, and he's going to ask his question via video. So all you, Curtis.
All right. Good morning, all.
Morning.
So as being a first responder for natural disasters and hurricanes, one thing as a chaplain that I get to always implement is exactly this model, is that you meet people first at their point of need. You find out if they're hungry. You find out if they're thirsty. Have they had someone to talk to? Are they getting fresh air? The things that they need at a base level. So my question is, this method and model should be top tier, should be the first line of defense in what we are battling in the socio-economical world, especially in this crisis. Do you believe, either of you, Steve or Suzi, do you believe that this model is being somewhat negated, rather by omission, in favor of the medicines and the because we seem to convict a lot of people before we actually get to the true treatment. And in my mind, I believe a lot of people, we could skip whether it's the jail system, the medical system, if we approach them first at this point of need. And the second part to that question is, do you ever think that this model will make it to that top tier in all rights?
I love it, Curtis. Thank you so much. Suzi or Steve?
Steve, you want to go first this time?
Well, sure. You know, again, I think it is. It is happening. Curtis, I think it's happening. And I think people are recognizing the bottom-up need that we've been talking about the whole time. I don't need to repeat all of that, but I think they're recognizing that and starting to find out the medical model for so many people, and Suzi's already illustrated this well, who have suffered childhood trauma. The medical model doesn't work. And so because it's not working, we have to take a different approach. And that is that bottom-up approach that you just mentioned to all of us, that we work from that bottom up so that we can get to that higher level where you can even have a good spiritual conversation, and you can connect to the spiritual part of us when we're regulated enough to do it. And I don't think the medical model can deny that. And shortcut it with pharmaceuticals. You know, I think pharmaceuticals definitely have their place, and I'm not starting a diatribe against them. I just agree with you, is can't we start bottom up first before we get to that place? And Suzi, I'll turn it back your way.
You know, one of the things that's happened, Curtis, is that you get to go out and really meet people where they're at and ask the most important questions, like you just said, because it's a disaster area, or it's a crisis at this point. You go to a doctor's office, that's not what they do. They're not asking you what you're eating and if you're breathing and if you've drank any water that day and what's going on in your life. And they have been trained and they have been rewarded and need to do what it is that they've been trained to do to help you. I don't want to put it down either, because if my arm falls off right now, please someone call someone to sew it back on, okay? I'm not going to just go out for a walk and have my dog carry my arm. Okay, so that being said, this is a both. I am so tired of buts and either or. This is a both situation. It is so timely for all of us to understand the totality of what wellness looks like and well-being looks like. So that idea that you first find out what's going on in your life before any medication is given, and your nutrition habits and everything else that's going on. Then you make a connection with that person that you're helping. You listen before you become the expert. You empathize, you get it. And then that reasoning starts with, what's the plan that you're going to implement? I don't make the plan for someone. They make their own plan. If I'm just going to write you a prescription, you're not in the plan. And you've just been given the idea that somehow that medication is going to fix everything. Let me explain what medication is supposed to do in sort of a psychotherapy. It is only supposed to help you do the work that will actually heal you. Let me say that again. Medication is only supposed to make it a little bit easier for you to get off the friggin' couch or stop yelling and start to do the practices that will literally help you heal. And what have we done? We've actually made the medicine the cure, and it's not. It's part of a help. In fact, more people commit suicide once they're on antidepressants than, and that's a fact. That's a scientific fact that actually gives them a little enough energy and they're less depressed so they can go out and do it now. So we have to change. And it's actually going to come from the patients, the clients, the people that are being served. That's where it's going to come from. Because many in the medical model don't have a big motivation right now to change, right? They've got to protect their job. I get it. At the same time, you guys get to speak up and say, no, you don't just get to write me a script. I need to tell you about what's going on in my life. And I need to know other things that can help me. When my blood pressure, my heart doctor, we were both on the same medication, and I changed my eating and worked out more and did all this, and I came back in and my blood pressure was lower than his. And he asked me, what the hell are you doing? Why did yours work better than mine? And I said, well, what did you eat last night? Pizza. And I go, well, there you go. When was the last time you walked around this hospital and took a nice brisk walk around here? And how come there's not a therapist in your office, by the way? Because most of this comes from childhood trauma. And he started to laugh and he went, good point.
I love it, Suzi. And really, you know, she speaks, Curtis, so much about the fact, and I think it's so important to really relay, like, you know, I'll give you one example. I always profess within MVP, like Dr. Nadine Burke, who's the California Surgeon General right now. And Nadine Burke, like, listen, she started doing her work like 5 or 6 years ago, Curtis. Like, we're talking about, like, this stuff is extremely new. And we all have to be patient. And some of us got to some of these practices and they're working really well for us right now. And it just takes a little bit of time. And so, you know, for the people that are actually experiencing these like wellness practices that are working, the best we can do is be ambassadors to the model, right? The stuff that Steve and Suzi are saying is like, you know, bottom up grassroots approach is saying like, I do these things and they work really well for me. And you have to pass it on. The hard part is always being the first one to the door, because you have to open that door for yourself and for other people. And so it's a growing movement. It just takes a little bit of time. And Suzi's so right. The Nadine Burke's like TED Talk is really great as well as like a lot of Brene Brown's like vulnerability stuff and the vulnerability hangover. There's some really good stuff coming up, but it's so new. And you even see it within, you know, the practice kind of like top-down approach in the research. And so they're just, the medical model is a little bit more cautious on some of these things. The people that don't have to sort of fiddle in that world get the opportunity to practice new things. And so that's what our opportunity is to talk about. So thanks so much, Curtis. Do we have one last question for Suzi or for Steve?
I got one thing I'd like to say.
It's not a question, but I'm sorry.
Oh, go.
Yeah, go ahead, David.
It's not a question, and I hope people don't think that I was like putting down the medical community, because I am a big preacher and a big believer in therapy. One thing that did help me a lot tremendously was something called prolonged exposure therapy. And it was something that I had to go through in order for me to be able to heal. But like you said, Suzi, sometimes when you can't heal unless you deal with those childhood traumas, you know, all those things are connected, right? So I wasn't able to move forward with my recovery through MVP and therapy until I was able to deal with those childhood traumas that I, you know, had gone through when I was a child. So all of that is connected. And it was very difficult for me to get to that point, because when I was dealing with my trauma, when it related to to my combat, it got to the point where, okay, I was at a point where, great, success, right? But it got to the point where I couldn't move forward unless I dealt with that childhood trauma. So it's all connected, and I'm glad that you brought it up. You know, because again, I hope you guys don't think that I'm bagging on the medical community, but I just wanted to share that.
Well, I bag on it sometimes.
Yeah, and I think it's what Suzi said before, right? It's like a yes and thing, right? So it's like yes, and we have to like do this together and bring it in. And you know, to Suzi's point and to David's point, we're not knocking like that. You know, people do need medicine, right? Some people do actually have bipolar and they need some of these things, and because their brain is missing some of these chemicals and a little bit maybe some of their childhood trauma or things they've experienced. And so it's a combination of like healing factors that I think is not like a one size fits all, which is so important. We have one last question that I want to wrap here, and I'm going to go to Schmidt And so I'm going to spotlight you and then let you ask your question. Go for it.
Yes. So thank you so much for having me, and Curtis, thank you for inviting me on the talk. My question is, I know a lot of people mentioned how the medical community somewhat is not pushing certain things, which is not what I want to ask. But my question is, you mentioned the concept of breathing. You mentioned the concept of being able to understand certain things physically before moving higher. As you talked about breathing, my kind of like practice really talks about how to reduce external stimuli and so on and so forth. Could you talk to the group more about like the importance or the power that we have within our senses when it comes to regulating stress or regulating our physiological responses and so on?
Steve?
Sure. I just want everyone to appreciate that the sensory information that we get from ears and eyes and nose and skin comes into our system very low in the brain. And when it comes in a soothing and pleasurable and, let me say, rhythmic way, when we have those good rhythms that our senses are flowing, they're very healing. They're given to us as gifts, and I believe that because where they come in low in the brain is the regulating part, the part of our brain we need to regulate. It's the most regulating part of our brain. So I'm with you on that. I think paying attention to the pleasures of our senses is hugely important.
You know, one of the things we did at Boulder Crest again in those first 48 hours was to talk about the five senses and how important they are about bringing up memories. And
Yes.
what we can, so here's one of the practices. I could sit and put on a playlist of music that of you know, horrible love songs, you know, of losing my partner and cry all day because, you know, I've lost my partner. Or I could put on a playlist from my childhood, the good parts of it when I was a dancer, and I could go dance around and play that playlist. I could put on the angry playlist when I go to the gym. We all know what that one is, and do that. Or I could put on one that is more uplifting. I can think about a meal that I had where I was connected with people. We used to ask the veterans especially to talk about a meal that they had during combat that was absolutely so connecting to them and their moment in their life and out there. And you could see the joy. You just saw joy come up when they started to talk about that and why that food was so important to them. So you're absolutely right, Schmidt, that these senses that we have are so powerful. There's only trouble is that we keep missing one, and that's called intuition. Intuition is probably our best. And unfortunately, even as children, we're not convinced that it works. So when you intuitively know something's going on with mom and dad, you ask them and they say, no, everything's fine. Then you don't believe your intuition is strong and well. And that's absolutely something too that we need to understand, that you guys have very strong intuition.
Yeah, I love it, Suzi. Thanks, Schmidt. And to bring a practice to that too, for Steve and Suzi, which they've probably heard of this. Schmidt, like my therapist taught me grounding exercises with your senses. So it's a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So sometimes you do this before bed because your mind is kind of like spinning a bit. So what I do is it's like, what are 5 things that I hear right now? And you can close your eyes and feel that. What are 4 things that maybe you that you feel right now in your body? Maybe it's the covers. What's the third sense, like smell and taste, and you kind of go down. And then what's the first thing that you're like grateful for? Just something kind of to calm your brain down. And what's really cool is it brings you present, and you slowly feel like when you practice that every night, you're able to go to sleep a little bit faster. And so that's what's worked for me, like a grounding exercise that's been used sort of at, but it kind of blends these senses. And you don't have to do 5 things you hear, you could do 5 things you smell or 5 things you taste, and however you sort of work the practice in that best works for you. And then like when you're not sleeping, you can do other things. Like maybe you go into a room and you practice this for 5 or 10 minutes. Just close your eyes, shut the door, and then go through these senses. Just get you back grounded when you feel. And again, we're talking about a little bit about what Tony talked about last week, which is like the fear response, right? And what Steve and Suzi are bringing in. When you're feeling a little bit triggered and you feel like anxious or whatever it may feel like, you can ground yourself in some of these senses practices. So wholeheartedly believe that. So with that, we're 3 minutes over, but I really appreciate everyone, Suzi and Steve, thank you so much for offering everything you have to our community. For the folks who weren't able to join us, we have recorded this for people who do want to watch this later or share it with their friends. But we continue to build our community at Merging Vets and Players. We're bringing folks in like Suzi and Steve to help us build our program model. And so I really, really appreciate all of you for contributing to the practice of mental health, for the things that we practice at MVP, because we truly believe in a lot of this stuff. And first and foremost, if anyone has questions or things for Suzi and Steve offline, we have most folks like email addresses. We will send it out and put it on Twitter as well. So thanks so much, everyone, for the time. We appreciate you. Suzi and Steve, any last words you have around like practices or things for our community?
The one thing I hear from Dr. Perry all the time is make a routine, make your life predictable. Have some predictable parts of every day, and I'll leave it right at that.
I love it, Steve.
I agree with that. Again, look up that 478. Start deep breathing. I held my breath most of my life, and so keep breathing. Like, do it. Deep breathe. Get high on oxygen. It's the strongest and best drug we've got. It's free.
Excellent. It is free. Thanks so much, Steve. Suzi, appreciate you all. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today, and we'll have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.